This is DartPoints podcast number 94 for September 19th, 2023. In this podcast, we'll discuss managed detection and response with our partner, Red Canary. We'll be joined by Red Canary's Eric Gross and our own solutions architect manager, James Williamson.
And today we're going to introduce our listeners to Red Canary's managed detection and response solution. Cybersecurity should always be at the forefront of an organization's security posture. We've talked a lot about cybersecurity best practices, and it's always a challenge to make sense of all these different security solutions and telemetry data at your fingertips. This is where Red Canary comes in.
So we'll discuss this and why it's easier now more than ever to have a first-class EDR and MDR solution protecting your organization. There will be additional show notes and information at the end of this episode. All this and more in this DartPoints podcast. And welcome to another DartPoints podcast. So, hey Michael, how's it going?
Going real good. Excited for today's podcast.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a good one today. So we have fewer people than last time, but we do have some new faces here. So let's start by introducing our guests, and then we'll kick off what we're going to do with this podcast. This podcast, by the way, we're gonna circle back onto cybersecurity, and we have two special guests, Eric Gross from Red Canary and Jimmy Williamson from DartPoints. So, guys, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves, tell us your current responsibilities, your background, how long have you been with the respective company? That would be great. Eric, you go first.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. This will be a lot of fun. But yeah, I'm from Red Canary. You can see I'm one of the senior sales engineers here in my current role. But yeah, I have a lot of 10 plus years in the cybersecurity industry, and a lot of that, a handful of that was prior to Red Canary, where I came from a Fortune 500 institution, and I was one of their lead endpoint and security guys for a number of years, and built out a whole security operations program there. And ultimately, I did transition over to Red Canary, and been here for 6 years at this point. And those first 3 to 4 years, I was on our customer-facing side, doing what we refer to as threat hunting or incident handling, working with a lot of our incident response partners, etc., to handle customer security incidents. I ultimately did that, worked a ton of on-call, and eventually transitioned over to doing pre-sales work. And now we get to help net new customers all day long. So love what I'm doing.
Absolutely. Jimmy, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Will, for having me. So I'm the DartPoints Solution Architect Manager. So I actually manage our team of SAs who help our customers, help. Yeah, absolutely, Will. So make sure you do a good job. Make sure that they have what they need to help our customers, find the solution to their problems. I also help support some of our sales folks directly. So my background, I've been in enterprise IT for, too long, 20 years. So a long time in the industry. Sort of started out on the enterprise IT side in healthcare and finance, and then moved to actually work for a reseller for a few years, selling different technologies. My background is actually a little more in the data protection, infrastructure as a service, virtualization background. So I'm new to this sort of cybersecurity. And I've been here at DartPoints for about 6 years now. So happy to be here.
Fantastic. And then we've got Michael, my lovely co-host.
So MDR today, right?
Yeah. So
right.
in past podcasts, and I urge all our listeners and viewers to go back and watch some of our previous podcasts that are really good. I mean, Michael and I have talked about intrusion detection, intrusion prevention. We've talked about MITRE frameworks, so we've gotten into a lot of, security best practices. We explained how the frameworks are laid out and so on and so forth. So I think in this podcast, I think this is probably the first podcast that we've actually had a cybersecurity partner on the podcast that DartPoints is actually partnered with to deliver a solution to our customers in terms of managed detection and response tool, right? And usually that will go in lockstep with an EDR, an endpoint protection and response package. So we're glad to have Eric here with us to kind of talk about what Red Canary brings to the table, and then kind of go deep dive into the solution. So I think before we get started, actually, going through kind of what is MDR, let's talk a little bit about, what is EDR, right? Because maybe someone doesn't know, or maybe someone is new to cybersecurity. Who wants to tackle kind of defining what EDR means to you?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take that. So our listeners, or someone's watching the video on this particular podcast, you're going to hear a lot of acronyms, and we're going to try to do as good a job as possible to define each one and really talk about the differences between each one, right? So we're going to start with EDR. We'll progress through and talk about MDR and a few other acronyms as well. So EDR stands for Endpoint Detection and Response. And what that is software that is installed on endpoints to help protect them from different types of threats. Certain EDRs have kind of a pre-infection prevention piece where there's some next-gen AV that is utilized to keep threats off, right? So that's your kind of pre-infection protection. They also sometimes incorporate things like what I call like vulnerability analysis light, where it'll scan for applications and look to see if those applications have a particular vulnerability, and it'll outline those within the EDR software. They also have something, usually a component that's kind of on the post-infection side, where it's looking at behaviors of applications or processes that are running on the systems. And this is really cool because what they often do is they align it with the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which Will and I have talked about in previous podcasts, and we'll talk about again today. But it's looking at processes that match tactics and techniques that align with the framework, and then we'll flag on those, right? So a lot of common EDRs that you'll hear out there: SentinelOne, Carbon Black, CrowdStrike has one, Fortinet has one with FortiEDR. There are dozens and dozens of different EDR vendors out there, but at a high level, that's kind of what they do. They're there to protect the system from damage, and they also do integrate with MDRs and other security solutions to exchange threat telemetry data.
So, Michael, would you say an EDR is kind of a next step in antivirus? Can you still run antivirus along with an EDR tool, or are they kind of mutually exclusive, or how do you see that running in today's world?
You can, but you don't necessarily have to. Like I said, a lot of EDRs have they incorporate next-gen AV with them, so you can replace your legacy antivirus solution with that, but you don't necessarily have to. I have seen in certain cases, if you're running two EDRs, sometimes they'll cause some issues. For example, I've seen certain situations where organizations choose to run two EDRs, and one EDR will think that a process is actually malicious when it's not, because the other EDR is using process injection to actually inspect that traffic. So it looks like there's a malicious process when there's actually not. So in certain cases, it can cause problems. It really depends on which EDR solution you're using alongside another AV. But you can write exclusions. That's another thing you can do to kind of limit those problems.
Gotcha. Yeah, the way I see EDR really is, I think it goes well beyond what you see with a antivirus, right? Everyone can run antivirus, but really, as cybersecurity threats are getting more, how can I put this? Getting more smart, getting more challenging to detect. We need to have some type of solution that's actually looking at, not only just blocking someone from installing software or doing what do you call it, and putting a virus on your system. You have to really look and see what's actually going on in the computer's brain, right, or server's brain. You have to look and have the software actually look for malicious activity besides just, hey, I've got a virus, right?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I'll say about that, antiviruses do a pretty good job. Antivirus solutions do a pretty good job of keeping malware off machines or cleaning malware up, right? One issue that you run into, of course, is if it's something novel, right? Say a
Mhm.
0-day, something new like that. Another issue that you can run into is when an attacker is living off the land, right? They gain access to a machine, and instead of deploying some malware, they just leverage, PowerShell, right? To run scripts. And if you don't have something that can look for those types of attacks, and you're just running a traditional antivirus solution, you could run into some problems.
Yeah, you're not well protected with that.
I think
Jimmy and Eric, you guys, I mean, I'm sure you guys see the same thing, right? With looking at differences between antivirus and EDR. It's no longer just an antivirus world, right?
that's absolutely right. I mean, as Michael was saying, I think some of the things you're seeing today, whether living off the land using the existing tools, or even some of the things that can evade antivirus, like some fileless-based attacks, right, where we're just downloading and executing directly into memory. There's no signature to detect. There's no real file to scan.
Right.
I've always sort of explained it as, absolutely making the analogy is of EDR is most of the time it is the capability of antivirus plus a lot of analytics, and plus, especially as we start talking about MDR and XDR and some of these other components, is at its core, it's the tool that allows us to get telemetry data from workstations and servers. I mean, there's lots of other ways, like we'll talk about, that we can get telemetry into Red Canary and into our MDR, but for our endpoints, that's what allows us to do that.
And you said one thing that is absolutely true, which will lead us into what MDR is, right? Is you said the word a lot. It is a lot. So the thing is with EDR does a great job. Endpoint detection and response does a really good job of looking for anomalies, looking for possible threats, viruses, someone trying to do key logging, someone trying to sniff around in your network card, these types of things. But it generates a lot of data. And what we find in today's world is, especially when you have an IT organization who maybe doesn't have a dedicated security team, right? Maybe it's just, you have a team, and one of the sections of that team is responsible for cybersecurity. They're not necessarily dedicated to it 24/7. The problem is there's when you have, 5 endpoints, not a big deal. When you have 500 endpoints, 5,000 endpoints that you're trying to protect, now it becomes a magnitude amount of more data to surf through. And that's what we really think that MDR, managed detection and response, really helps out with, right? Because people need help looking at this data, and not only just looking at the data, but analyzing, let's see, I think this is a false alarm, and then whitelisting that and moving on, and then knowing which alerts, what telemetry is actually something that you need to take action on. And I think that's where really MDR comes in. So Eric, let's hear your definition kind of MDR and how it relates to Red Canary.
Yeah, it's kind of, this is a fascinating discussion, because when you think about this in like super simplistic terms, it's as if someone goes to the store, gets a doorbell camera and puts it on the front of their house. Very easy to manage, right? But all of a sudden, that same store has a sale for 30 cameras for buy one, get 30 free, and they go install 30 cameras around their house. You're going to get fantastic visibility, but how do you manage all that data, all that video feed coming in? It's the same thing with this concept of endpoint detection and response. Is fantastic technology, but how do you operationalize it, right? And that's where Red Canary comes in, and obviously DartPoints comes in, and we'll talk about that. But at the end of the day, MDR, it's managed detection and response. So how do you manage those technologies that you're monitoring, in this case, like endpoint detection and response? And then detection, to your point, Will, is okay, once you've looked at all the data, how do you analyze it in an efficient way and find threats within that data? We've heard for years this concept of needle in the haystack, right? And then I think where it often falls flat, when you start to fully like invest in this concept of MDR, is the response piece. And obviously that's where DartPoints comes into play here. But is, all right, we've identified the threat, we know what it's doing. How do we get rid of this thing and get it out of our environment, right? So that's how I kind of look at it, is just operationalizing, in this case, these amazing technologies like EDR in a meaningful way. And more importantly, not just during business hours. What about 2 o'clock in the morning? Who's looking at the data then? So that's just my 2 cents on it.
Yeah. And I really, go ahead, Michael. I'm sorry.
I was going to kind of piggyback on something that Eric mentioned at the end there about having something occur during business hours. And one of the really awesome things about Red Canary's MDR is the concept of playbooks, right? Where you can set up triggers and you can set up playbooks, or basically responses to those triggers. And they can be triggers that just notify or triggers that act, right? So you can say, hey, if I see a high severity alert that comes through, I want an email sent out, or I want an SMS sent out, or I want a phone call, or maybe I want those notifications, but on top of that, I also want some type of action to be taken. I want that endpoint to be isolated. So if it does happen at 2 a.m. and everybody's asleep, when they get in at 7 a.m., 8 a.m., whatever it may be, whenever their shift starts, they can then look at that and determine what happened and what needs to take place. So it's giving you a lot more coverage in that 24/7 sense without having to have eyes on glass for your organization during those off hours.
Yeah. The thing, and kind of taking it, zooming out a little bit, we start talking about, how the Red Canary product works and MDR in general, so the way Red Canary works, and guys, correct me if I'm wrong about this, is there is basically, when you have your EDR practice solidified, whether you're using Carbon Black, SentinelOne, name your supported EDR platform here, all that telemetry is then funneled into the MDR platform, that telemetry data coming from your various points, including next-gen firewalls, right? When you're looking at perimeter protection, all this data is being, instead of having, a few people in your organization look at all this data from various points, all this data is funneled into the Red Canary MDR platform. And then on the back end, MDR's really the power of MDR through Red Canary is that data is being analyzed by, the AI engine, looking at the vulnerabilities, looking at possible attacks. And there's actually a team of people at Red Canary who are looking at this data, right? So when you're, 2 a.m, when you get paged or called or SMS message, you're actually responding to something that's real, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the powers of one of the powerful points of Red Canary.
I think it's crunching it down into actionable events, right? Red Canary, and I wish we had like screenshotted this to share during the podcast, but Red Canary has this cool visual where they show on the left side of the screen the amount of telemetry that's come in, right? And then what they've done to kind of whittle that down, and then what is actually a threat, and then what is a high severity threat, right? So they're showing all of the data that's come in, whether it's from an EDR, whether it's from a next gen firewall, or some other supported data point, and breaking those millions of data points down into something that's actionable, right? Where your employees are not having alert fatigue, where if they just have an EDR solution, it's, oh, okay, I got 10 new events today, let me go through this, or I got 20 new events, or whatever it may be. They're breaking that down to where you're getting, 1 or 2 a week, right?
Yeah.
It's much more manageable and digestible for organizations.
Yeah, I think, Michael, that's a thing we've heard a lot as well, right? So I that's one of my favorite things in when we show sort of the the portal, right? Is that waterfall diagram of how many millions of telemetry records, where it's from endpoints or SaaS or identity provider or whoever, flowing into from behaviors to correlated activities to threats. Because I think one thing that we've all seen being in IT is, whether it's security or not, alert fatigue is real, right? And so one of the great things about it is not only is getting down to those alerts, but that Red Canary does great is classifying those alerts, right? So if to your point, if it's 2 a.m. on Sunday morning and you're about to wake your CISO up, you want to make sure that you're doing it based on a real threat, right?
Right,
maybe not a low end threat that you could isolate on an endpoint and deal with the next day, but right, you want to make sure you understand what the impact is. And that's one of the great things I think that we've seen that MDRs provide that sometimes you can't always get from that SIM or SIEM or however you like to pronounce it. Some of the older technology that's out there is taking that down, and also having someone, your security incident response team at Red Canary, kind of help narrow those down and make sure that they're real.
Well, and that's something that I was gonna ask Eric about, is really, a lot of people, and I when I talk to customers and I ask them about their security posture, we ask about, do you have a SOC? Do you have a security operations center, right? And that's where most people kind of go, we don't. We have, Joe over here, who is our security guy, and he's watching the alerts, 9 to 5, maybe a little longer, maybe a little shorter, but basically it may not be his dedicated job. And no single person, I mean, honestly, I would say probably even a small team of people can't, be on top of it all the time. Where I think the Red Canary product, not only are you getting a best in class software, and technology, but you're also relying on the human aspect of partnering with DartPoints and Red Canary to bring that kind of virtual SOC, that virtual security operations center, to people who typically, maybe in the past, wouldn't have such a thing. Eric, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's just the reality of the world we're living in nowadays. Is I'm sure for most of you listening to the podcast today, if you were to go out and actually look at what it would cost to staff your organization 24/7, highly educated individuals, the cost would be astronomical, right? It just wouldn't make sense. So that is like one of the main reasons that a company would look at a Red Canary MDR service. Is to your exact point, Will, is we've been around for almost 10 years now, building out, and Jimmy, you called this out perfectly earlier, is the behavioral analytics, right? It's a lot easier to look at, we're ingesting, petabytes of data a day. It's one thing to say, all right, what are all the malicious IP addresses in this? What are the malicious URLs? That's one way of detection strategy, and we of course do that. But when you can get really smart individuals, and kind of what's unique about Red Canary is, in a traditional SOC model, it's tier 1, 2, maybe it might even be a 3. And the low level folks maybe work the events and the alerts, and the tier 3 folks actually write the behavioral analytics. So there you could have a situation where tier 3 folks write a bad analytic, and the tier 1 folks have to deal with it. Hence your point about alert fatigue. Well, at Red Canary, we have a flat model where it's very experienced folks. Think about like tier 3, tier 4 individuals who not only write the analytics that find the threats, but they also actually will analyze and confirm a threat. So what it's, we have this kind of eat your own dog food situation. So our detection criteria is really, it's really polished because people don't want to burn themselves, if you will. So when you take that and then put them kind of, remote work, can do the work they want on the shift they want, and then they have an individual next to them that says, hey, Bob, thank you for convicting that threat. I'm going to validate your work. Yeah, I agree. Then publish. And at the end of the day, I think we ran numbers recently. We're at less than 1% false positive rate, which for all you guys on the call, that's pretty rare, right, in this industry from the perspective of publishing threats over to customers. So yeah, we've kind of hacked away at it in different ways for sure.
Yeah, and you mentioned something, kind of when we talk about frameworks, right? And one of the things that impressed me when I first started working with Michael and our team with cybersecurity, right, and kind of getting up to speed on some of the cybersecurity practices, was learning about, and this was referenced in a previous podcast. Please go back and listen. We talked about the MITRE attack framework, and I think that is actually, Michael, would you say that's kind of the standard when it comes to understanding vulnerabilities, kind of the practice for proper cybersecurity, right? Would you say that's kind of like the hallmark of when you're looking at cybersecurity, these are like the best practices, right?
I would say that a lot of solutions that focus on attacks like your EDRs and your MDRs, they reference the MITRE attack framework all the time when they are referencing a threat, right? So, hey, we saw this. Here are the different techniques that this aligned to, because it gives you context of what is actually going on, right? And you see that in EDRs, and you see that in Red Canary's MDR. And one of the things that I really love about Red Canary's alerts is they give you digestible information for maybe somebody who is not super technically savvy from a security perspective, but they give you the super nuts and bolts as well, right? So when an alert comes through, you'll have a plain English explanation at the very top saying what happened. And then as you go further down, they'll reference the MITRE techniques that were utilized here. And sometimes if it's the case of like a PowerShell script that was run, they'll actually show you the output of that. So you're getting a full picture, and you can kind of consume as much as you want as a user, right? Again, if you have somebody who's a security professional that's juggling like 10 different things and maybe is not super well versed in MITRE, and that's all foreign to them, they can read the plain English alert at the very beginning and be like, okay, here's what's happening, right? But if you have somebody who is more well versed in the nuts and bolts of it, they still get that information.
100%. I think it's this matter, like, finally, I think a lot of cybersecurity professionals, when MITRE released the attack and the whole matrix was kind of like, yes, we finally have a common language. So if I call you up, Michael, and I say I'm researching this PowerShell attack, you know exactly what I'm talking about, and it's not some proprietary wording that you came up with yourself, right? So I think, to your point, at the end of the day, if you can take something like MITRE attack, and this is what Red Canary does, and you can say, all right, customer X, we've seen these techniques, these high-level tactics over the last 6 months in your environment. We start to understand what your attack surface is. And then, can work towards a solution to reducing that attack surface. And it's not elusive, it's not cloudy, it's very specific. When we talk about this particular technique, it means a threat actor was trying to do X, and then we can attack it accordingly. So I think it's a big relief for the industry. It's one of the reasons Red Canary chose to adopt it, is because then we can work, Red Canary can work with a partner like DartPoints, and we can all be on the same page, right? So super important. So,
and it helps organizations to intelligently select countermeasures going forward.
well
Right?
said,
You're
yeah.
not, like, I mean, we all know there's a tremendous amount of security solutions that exist today. It's not randomly, hey, let's go get this email protection solution, or let's go get this SASE solution, or let's go get this. You're looking at attacks that have happened in real life against your organization, and then, all right, say these 5 techniques were used. What type of countermeasures protect against those? Right, we are vulnerable to these. To reduce our attack surface, we need to focus our attention on this. So it allows you to much more intelligently be able to decide on what security solutions to look at in the future.
And in the end, this framework we're talking about, the communication, in the end, the outcome is we want to reduce the time that it takes to recover from a cyber attack, right? Or mitigate it completely, right?
Yeah, that's a great point, Will. I think the other part of that is, not only that, but detecting. I think that's what we've seen is how long does it take to detect a threat is in your environment, right? That can be prevented. And I think the last thing I looked at was typically that's 90 to 120 days if you don't have some way to find those earlier, to do threat hunting to see what's going on. And by that time they may have accomplished whatever it was that they
too late.
It's too late at that point. I mean, they've already either exfiltrated the data or spread laterally through the environment, or it's bad things will happen. So that's the big point. We want to reduce that from days and weeks to minutes or hours.
So talking about continuing to reduce the time. So we have the technology, we have the communication, right? When we deploy Red Canary out to customers, the customer has access to a portal, right, where they can look at their telemetry data, kind of get that warm and fuzzy feeling of saying, oh, everything's green, right? Everything's good. I'm not going to start panicking just yet. But they have the ability to see their own metrics, right? As well as interact with DartPoint security staff, and as well as Red Canary experts, right? But one of the things that I was very impressed with when I first started looking at Red Canary and running it in the lab and things like this is the ability to have the run books, right? And I think this is a very, very important part of what Red Canary does in terms of automating not only the detection, but what am I going to do when I need to respond, which is part of that's the R, right, in MDR. So Eric, can you talk a little bit about, what is a Red Canary run book? Why is it really a must have when dealing with this type of solution?
Yeah, I wish I could come on here and say, hey, adversaries, please only attack my organization between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. But I've tried it, they don't listen, right? So Red Canary, yeah, we built out this concept of playbooks. So I've heard some people refer to it as like a SOAR light, if you will, security, orchestration, automation, and remediation response, right? But at the end of the day, it's super simple how we think about it is we have this concept of a trigger. What does Red Canary have to observe? And when we observe that activity, what actions or responses do you want to take? And it could be as simple as, hey, when Red Canary observes a high threat, isolate endpoint that the threat was found on. Or it could be much more sophisticated to say, hey, if we have the IT admin and their account is experiencing a credential compromise, suspend that account until the threat's remediated, and then notify the security team, right? So I think the reason we kind of created these playbooks was one, for flexibility, and two, to basically add, enable the teams like yourself, DartPoints, to then help your customers to like have an extra member on their team. Because when you turn these playbooks on, you don't have to pay them benefits. You don't have to, give them vacation hours. It's just built into the platform, and it can be configured in numerous ways. I think the last piece about this is back to what I originally was talking about, is where I've seen a lot of teams fall flat is they find good technology, they get lucky and find a few good folks, but the technology gets partially implemented, or the folks never fully get to actually do security technology and engineering, aka how do we operationalize the investments we made. These playbooks take it that last step to take a product like Sentinel-1, which is extremely powerful. It can do things like isolate endpoints, kill known malicious processes, delete files, to actually have those be automatically engaged with or without human input. So just a high level overview there, but curious to hear others' thoughts that I've seen.
Right. And really what I really like to hear is the run books or playbooks. Those are things that happen automatically. There isn't necessarily someone saying, okay, now let's do like in a DR event, let me fail over, let me go manually do something. This is all happening automatically. Jimmy, I have a great idea. We're going to rebrand the Red Canary DartPoint solution. We're going to call it Skynet. Nothing can go wrong.
Oh, I don't know.
How about that?
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, I mean, that is really the power, right? Is, when there is definitely something, amiss, let's go ahead and take action. Let's go ahead and isolate. Let's mitigate the threat as quickly as possible, and then get notification out to the right people so they can respond to that threat after protection has happened.
I think that's a great point, and I think that's one of the things we try to emphasize is containment is key, right? So stopping this threat as early as possible. First, you have to know it exists, then you have to take an action on it. And so I think that's a great way, because I think most people have realized in today's world, somebody's going to get compromised at some point. There's just no real way around that. So what do? You want to be able to detect and act on it as quickly as possible. So
yeah, just to give you a real life example how powerful these playbooks are is we had a customer come over to us, and they were coming off a full ransomware event, horrible stuff. We're able to get restored, back up and running, and they put Red Canary in place. And knowing the history there, we put a ransomware playbook in place that basically said Red Canary is very good at detecting this concept of precursors to ransomware. So before ransomware actually hits an environment, there's 5 or 6 steps that threat actor has already done, right, before the actual endpoints get encrypted. So those are the behaviors we focus on really, really clearly. So we had this playbook in place, and it said, if Red Canary detects precursors to ransomware, isolate the host, ban any known malicious IP addresses, and kill the running processes. So that customer came on board, and I kid you not, 1 week into the relationship with us, that threat actor came back, because I don't think they paid the ransom, and the threat actor tried to re-ransom their environment. We had that playbook in place, and it caught those techniques on patient 0, the first endpoint. The user that had clicked on the email, isolated their host, notified, rang the bell, right? And we're able to prevent that environment from getting re-ransomwared, a week after they had just gotten cleaned up. So it can't express how powerful these things are.
Yeah, that's very powerful. And the other thing I want to kind of reiterate is, the technology is there, the actual bits and bytes are best in class, but the experience that you guys at Red Canary bring is priceless, right? Because a lot of times when you're dealing with small to medium organizations, maybe they never have had a cyber event, right? Ransomware, virus, so on and so forth. And maybe they do have their antivirus up to date. Maybe they are running some type of EDR platform. But if things are always green, they're not going to really necessarily know how to respond quickly when something bad happens. And the thing that I like about Red Canary is you guys have seen it all. You guys have seen a lot of things go on, and you bring that experience to people who maybe have never been through that themselves. Knock on wood, that's going to be the case for everyone, that people aren't having to deal with this as much these days moving forward. But the experience that the Red Canary team brings and the DartPoints team brings to the table, I think, is very, very, very valuable.
Yeah, just to blow that up a little bit, when you think about how we have our detection criteria set, we're not we don't have individual monitoring or specific monitoring for like a Fortune 5 versus a mom and pop shop. Our detection criteria is our detection criteria. So as let's say you're just a 50 endpoint or 100 endpoint employee organization, and you come on board with Red Canary and DartPoints, you're going to get the same detection capability that our Fortune, let's say 5 customer has, because it's all part of the same behavioral analytics. And that's quite, when you really think about it, that's pretty crazy, because you're getting world-class threat detection capabilities that a Fortune 5 company's also using in your 50 to 100 person organization. So it's very powerful even from that sense.
Yeah, it's very, very valuable for those organizations. So, Will, we've talked a lot about the EDR, what that is, how it incorporates with MDR, specifically Red Canary. Why don't we talk a little bit about the security solutions that play nice with it?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, not every EDR solution has been certified by Red Canary, but there are a lot, and I would say the major ones have been, right? So we Eric mentioned SentinelOne, which is an EDR platform that we actually here at DartPoints can resell and deliver to customers, right? So that's one. If maybe a customer doesn't have anything, maybe it's just like, I got Microsoft Defender and that's it, right? We can actually deploy SentinelOne and Red Canary as kind of, I'm not going to say bundle, but we can provide that solution in together, right? But it also supports CrowdStrike Falcon. Maybe if a person is like, hey, I want to do Microsoft Defender for endpoint, that's totally fine. We can do that as well. VMware Carbon Black, also another very popular endpoint EDR platform that Red Canary integrates perfectly with. And then, of course, when we start talking about firewalls, we've also been a longtime partner with Fortinet, right? And the FortiGate next gen firewalls actually can pump telemetry data to Red Canary. So if a customer's got, maybe using FortiGates in their perimeter, or using that as their router firewall, definitely integrates well with that, as well as something like SentinelOne. And then we layer on Red Canary on top of that, and it's just a great solution. But there's other integration points as well, right? When we start talking about other cloud providers, and additional integration points that is supported, right? Things from like Amazon GuardDuty, which personally I've never fooled with. I don't have experience with that. Cisco Umbrella, another very popular tool that's compatible with Red Canary. Okta, and also Palo Alto networks.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I'm missing. There's others there. Those are just the main ones that we support.
Yeah, I think what this boils down to is, at the end of the day, Red Canary is greedy for data. As much data as we can get to pull into our detection pipeline, we want to be able to utilize. And it's not just because we want to, have the best chance at detecting threats, but one area that customers come to us with really wanting more is when they get a threat from someone they're working with, or even when they're investigating on their own. It's not just they want to know when the particular activity occurred, but they might want to know where it started, what happened in the middle of the attack, what happened, did it spread, did it try to steal data. So as we start to not only pump in the fruitful data from an EDR, like you mentioned, Will, but when you start sending network data there, and then DNS data, and then you name it, right? Email data, it's going to give us a much better picture of what that attack looked like, should we find it. Now, that's not to say that if there's a customer listening that just has SentinelOne, or just is getting an EDR, that we can't have fantastic detection capability. As a matter of fact, Red Canary's first handful of years, all we did was support EDR, and we were very successful at that. Now it's just getting better and more polished as we pull different sources of data in. So.
Yeah, and one thing that I would mention there, and for anybody that's ever like worked incident response, having log data from a variety of different sources is very valuable, right? It's one thing to just have log like event logs or whatever it may be off the endpoint, but if you can pair that with log data from a load balancer or a firewall or DNS logs or whatever it may be, that paints a much clearer and more complete picture about what happened, right? You're not just seeing what happened on patient 0, right? The endpoint. You're seeing what happened before that, right? What the actual network traffic, how did they get in? If you're able to incorporate Office 365 into Red Canary and you're getting email alerts as well, you're getting that picture as well if it were maybe a phishing attempt or something like that. So it's a complete picture rather than just some of it.
Absolutely. So kind of how we provision it, and Michael, this goes into kind of how you guys have built up the kind of the onboarding process, right? When we start talking about onboarding customers, it's really easy. If a customer does or does not have an EDR platform, they can either purchase one from DartPoints or bring their own. I'm not sure if I'm hearing some. Okay. Yeah, sorry about that, guys. We had a little bit of a little glitch there. I think the audio is back now. But so if a person does not have an EDR platform, that's something we can provide, and then bundle that on top of, bundle on MDR on top of that. And a lot of times when I'm talking to customers, it's a lot of work to set this up, meaning asking the right questions, understanding what the customer environment is. And part of our onboarding when a person is wanting to consume this solution from DartPoints really is going through the sales engineering, solutions architecture, but also going through an online forum that Michael and his group has produced to kind of answer the questions that are most needed from customers to provide this service to them.
Yeah, and that really revolves around the playbooks, right? We talked about the playbooks quite a bit on this podcast, but since a lot of the responses to playbooks are going to be unique to each different customer, right? I want this distribution group notified, or I want these users notified, or I want this text message to be sent. That's going to be unique per customer. We need a way to easily be able to get that information. And not all customers are going to want to actually log into the Red Canary portal to go configure the playbooks themselves. So to make that easier on them, we have an online form that we send them. They fill it out, and then we take those results and we configure the playbooks for them, just to kind of streamline the process and make it easy on the customer.
I think, Michael, we also help with any of the integrations as well, whether that's Office 365 from a telemetry or integration with notification platforms like Slack or Teams or PagerDuty. That's part of the things we help as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's, Jimmy, that calls out a good point here, is from like a setup and configuration. I think if we think about old school technology, it was a lot of like bring new device on-prem or, insert new piece of technology. Depending on what the customer's technology is, it could just be a couple API connections, or it might be more involved, to your point, where it's a little bit more config with Office 365. But at the end of the day, we're not talking about like a 6-month onboarding to get up and running. Folks like Jimmy and the team there can like get you up and running fairly quickly with the way that Red Canary's architected it, because it's either API, email, syslog, all industry standard stuff. But really, we're just going to take a look at what technologies you have and build out capability from there.
So painless EDR and painless MDR. That's what we like to hear.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. So I think this was a really good podcast. This was a lot of information. I did have a slide that I was going to bring up, but I think at this point, I'm just going to paste this into the show notes. So it'll be some additional information that that customers can review on how we, it's kind of the feature set that we provide from DartPoints.
Yeah.
So we're almost to an hour, guys. So I think we've covered all the main points. Yeah. Would
Definitely.
I think that was very good. And Eric and Jimmy, thank you so much for joining today's podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for
Absolutely.
inviting me.
All right, guys. Well, we will see you guys on the next podcast. Again, thanks everyone. And we will be having, this will be out later today.
Take care, everybody.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.